Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily The Hindu News Analysis. Before we begin, I'm sure all of you know that UPSC yesterday has announced the results for 2022. So I would like to wish congratulations for all those aspirants who have cleared this prestigious exam. From BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, we are very pleased to announce that we have 4 top rankers within the top 20 and many more in the top 100. So do head to our YouTube channel to watch the mock interviews of our students who have cracked this exam. And these videos will also help you to stay motivated and also serves as a source of inspiration, especially if you're giving this year's prelims this Sunday. So do make the full benefit out of these videos which are being uploaded on YouTube. And also before we begin, we have a price drop campaign which is going on. And a special discount is being offered for a few days. And this special offer will last only till the 30th of May on our online and offline courses. If you guys are interested, do register immediately by using the link provided in the pinned comment below. With this, let's get started with the analysis for today's The Hindu Newspaper. And let's take a look at the topics we are going to discuss. I have chosen 3 important columns from page number 10 and 12 and an article from page number 1. Couple of them are from international relations related to India-Australia ties and the very important grouping known as the BRICS. And we also have an article related to an interstate water dispute between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. These 3 topics are very, very important for both prelims and mains. So let's thoroughly analyze these articles along with the background. Let's go beyond the article and study everything about these topics so that you don't have to go back and read these complex articles again. After that, we shall take a look at some smaller articles in today's newspaper with specific focus on prelims. I've chosen 4 important articles that are prelims oriented. So these are the topics we're going to cover, and if you're benefiting from our initiatives, just support us by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the first article for today related to India-Australia relations. As most of you know, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he is on a 3-nation visit since the last few days. As we speak, Prime Minister Modi is currently in Australia, taking forward India's ties with Australia. So over the last few days, Narendra Modi has visited Japan to attend the G7 summit, because Japan as the host country had invited India to participate as a guest country in the G7 summit. Following the G7 summit, the Prime Minister visited a very important Pacific island country, that is Papua New Guinea. And Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian PM to ever visit Papua New Guinea. This visit was with regard to the Forum for India-Pacific Islands Cooperation, which is a platform that India has established to set up close relations with Pacific Island nations. So after visiting this country and attending the Forum for India-Pacific Island countries, now the Prime Minister has headed to Australia to build and establish a stronger foundation for this strategic partnership with Australia. So let's look at the key developments that have happened during the visit. And after that, let's thoroughly analyze India-Australia relations. As Australia is a key Indo-Pacific power and is a strategic partner for India, the topic acquires a lot of significance for prelims. There are a number of facts from this topic which are important for your prelims, and you can also expect a mains question on India-Australia relations. Prime Minister Modi has pointed out that the India-Australia relations, they are based on mutual trust and respect. This itself signifies the close political, diplomatic and even cultural relations along with economic ties that we share with Australia. The Prime Minister has even addressed a large gathering of the Indian diaspora, and to take forward the cultural ties, Australia has even designated a suburb in Sydney, that is Harris Park, as Little India to reflect the strong cultural bonds between the 2 countries. Along with that, India has announced the opening of a new consulate in Brisbane, which was a long-standing demand of the Indian community in Australia. So these are some of the latest developments that have been reported during the Prime Minister's visit. But what is really important for us is to thoroughly examine and understand India-Australia relations. Now, if you look at the map that I have shared over here, you can notice that both India and Australia are major powers of the Indo-Pacific region. Both are important stakeholders of the Indo-Pacific. They are connected through the Indian Ocean, and their fate, their future prospects is tied to the stability of the Indian Ocean and as well as to the Pacific Ocean. So as the Indo-Pacific region has emerged as a global hub of geopolitics, and as all global powers are paying attention to this region and putting focus over here, the major powers of this region, that is India and Australia, they become very important and significant, and the relations between them plays a critical role in stabilizing the entire Indo-Pacific. Given the challenge posed by China in the Indo-Pacific and its rising aggression, it becomes all the more critical for like-minded democracies such as India and Australia to work together and collaborate together. So if you look at this partnership, there are some key aspects that come to mind. Now let's say UPSC has given a detailed question in mains on India-Australia. Or you might even expect an essay topic on Indo-Pacific region where you have to talk about India-Australia relations in detail. So in that context, you need the background. You need to understand the core foundation of India-Australia relations. These two countries are not just like-minded open democracies, but we also share a strategic partnership since several years. We have very close political relations between the two governments. India-Australia have been very friendly and very close partners of each other, along with a strong economic relationship that has flourished over the years. But one of the defining aspects of the relationship has to be the cultural ties between India and Australia. Starting with cricket, which acted as a cultural bond that bound India and Australia together. Today, it's the Indian community in Australia which is driving the cultural relationship. Australia is home to a strong Indian community of around 1 million people, which includes NRIs and as well as people of Indian origin. So, from India, we have thousands of students who prefer to go to Australia to study, especially for their higher education, right? Australian universities are highly preferred by students across the country, especially from Punjab, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and even all across India. Plus, Indian professionals, Indian workers, they seek out work opportunities in Australia as well. So, they travel in large numbers to Australia, settle down in the country, and several of them even become Australian citizens eventually. There are many more who are PRs in Australia. They have acquired permanent residency in Australia, right? And thus they are contributing not just to Australia's growth and its economy, but they are contributing to India as well. They are acting as India's cultural ambassadors in Australia, thus projecting India's soft power influence in the country. They also cement a strong bond between the two governments, and they can act as a force that can influence the Australian government to act in favor of the Indian government. So in Indian diplomacy, the diaspora community will play a critical role in influencing policies of the host country. They also send back remittances back home to their families in India, which is crucial to the Indian economy to bridge the current account deficit. So in many ways, the Indian community is contributing immensely to India-Australia relations. And now we have cemented a strong economic relationship by signing a free trade agreement known as ECTA that was signed last year. So this makes the topic all the more important. Just few months back in 2022, India-Australia have signed the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which provides for a free trade arrangement between the two countries. And more importantly, we have a flourishing defense, strategic and security relationship as we face similar threats and concerns in the Indo-Pacific. This is what brings India-Australia closer. the strategic threats, the security threats, and the maritime security concerns in the Indo-Pacific is what drives the two countries to come closer to each other. Now, if you examine the key developments of the last few years, there are many milestones in the India-Australia relationship. For example, in 2014, we signed a civil nuclear deal with Australia. Now, this is very, very significant because Australia was one of the Western countries which was critical of India in 1998 when India carried out the Pokhran nuclear tests. As India tested its nuclear weapons in 98, India was criticized by largely by the Western countries and was even brought under Western sanctions, economic and technological sanctions. This was led by the United States and by few European countries. Along with these countries, even Australia joined the club in criticizing India for violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty and for developing and testing nuclear weapons illegally. It even joined the Western group of countries to place sanctions on India. So from that to a stage where it has signed a civil nuclear deal to sell nuclear material to India and collaborate in this critical domain, it marks a remarkable transformation, that too in just 16 years. This goes on to show the strategic nature of the relationship and how much both the countries rely on each other. And it's also very important because Australia can guarantee India's energy security. Australia is already playing a big role in ensuring India's energy security because Australia has the world's largest reserves of uranium, which is very much essential for India to drive its civilian nuclear program. See, in our energy basket, we have diversified our energy sources and we want to move away from our dependency on thermal power. Today, majority of the electricity in the country is generated through thermal power plants, almost 58% of it. So in order to bring down our emissions and to transition towards clean renewable energy, India has very ambitious plans, not just for solar and wind power, but also to invest in nuclear power. So to set up nuclear plants across the country and generate clean electricity, we need uranium because India is deficient in uranium. And Australia, being the country with the world's largest uranium reserves, can become a reliable supplier of uranium to India. Even though India is not a member of Nuclear Suppliers Group, even though India is yet to join the NSG, Australia has already sent a shipment of uranium to India in 2017. This goes on to show the strategic partnership that has developed. It shows that Australia is keen to partner with India in the nuclear domain. Australia is already a major supplier of coal as well to India, which is helping run our thermal plants. As the coal in India is not of superior quality, and also there are a lot of deficiencies on the part of Coal India Limited, which is affecting coal production in the country. Indian power plants, they generally depend on coal which is imported from Australia and as well as from Indonesia. So Australia is already playing a big role in guaranteeing our energy security by supplying coal, and going forward it can become a reliable uranium supplier to help us transition towards clean energy. So that is the significance of the civil nuclear deal. Along with that, we have strong military relations that have developed because of the common objectives we have in the Indo-Pacific. Both India and Australia are deeply interested in tackling all the maritime security threats across the Indo-Pacific, be it counter-terrorism or countering piracy, especially in the Indian Ocean region, even tackling organized crime, especially drug trafficking and arms trafficking, which is widely prevalent in the Indo-Pacific. So all these maritime security threats, they are common concerns for India and Australia. Along with that, the Indo-Pacific is highly prone to disasters, natural disasters like cyclones, earthquakes, tsunamis, etc. So helping out the countries in distress and providing disaster management assistance known as HADR support or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief is also a focus for India and Australia. Take for example, how in 2004, when the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami hit multiple countries in the Indian Ocean, both India and Australia collaborated along with Japan and US, and all the four navies provided assistance, disaster management assistance during the 2004 tsunami. Even though India itself was hit very severely, we collaborated with the Australian and the Japanese and the American Navy to provide HADR assistance to all the other affected countries as well. In fact, that is what laid the foundation for the Quad grouping. The idea of a quadrilateral between these like-minded democracies came up following this naval initiative when disaster management assistance was given by the four navies. Following this, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan, he suggested the idea of the four democracies coming together to form an Asian security diamond to counter China in the Indo-Pacific and to stabilize the Indo-Pacific. It was this idea that later led to the Quad or the quadrilateral grouping, which today is one of the most important groupings of the Indo-Pacific. As part of the quadrilateral, India and Australia are working closely with the other two members, that is Japan and the US, to enforce a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, to ensure that all countries in the Indo-Pacific follow international rules. This is a direct message to China, which is breaking international law in the Indo-Pacific. They even have multiple military exercises with each other. For example, we take part in the Malabar exercise. The Malabar naval exercise initially was just a bilateral exercise between India and US that was started in 1992. But later, we have invited Japan and Australia as well. So now all the four Quad countries participate in the Malabar naval exercise. Back in 2007, that was the first time that India had invited Japan, Australia, and even Singapore had been invited by India in 2007 to take part in the Malabar exercise. But then China had expressed its anger against the exercise, and it had retaliated against India by blaming India for forming a military alliance against China. So in the interest of maintaining good ties with China, we had suspended the multilateral nature of Malabar exercise. We had stopped inviting Japan, Australia, and Singapore, and we had returned it back to the bilateral exercise just with the US. But after China deliberately started carrying out incursions and putting pressure on India, we invited Japan back into Malabar in 2015. And following the latest Ladakh clashes in 2020, India decided to bring Australia back as well. And since then, the four countries are part of the Malabar naval exercise. We also have bilateral exercises such as AUS Index between the Indian Navy and Australian Navy. And the two armies also have an exercise known as Austra Hind. Kindly make a note of these key facts, can be very important for your prelims. We are also part of important regional groupings such as IORA or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. India plays a key role at IORA grouping along with Australia and all the other rim countries of Indian Ocean to provide for regional cooperation in the Indian Ocean region. We have also established a 2+2 ministerial dialogue that allows the foreign and defense ministers of both the countries to interact with each other simultaneously and discuss all key foreign policy and security issues and coordinate their approach as well. Along with that, we have signed a logistics support agreement in 2020. This allows the armed forces to exchange military support at military bases of each other for logistical purposes, that is for refueling and resupplies. The signing of this logistics agreement will allow Indian armed forces to access Australian military bases for logistical support and vice versa. This increases the operational range of the armed forces of both the countries, and it also enables joint operations and interoperability. We have also started the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative along with Japan to reduce our dependency on China-dominated supply chains. Because the COVID-19 pandemic clearly showed the risk of depending on China-dominated supply chains. As the supply chains were disrupted, it affected economies around the world, and it has also given rise to fears that China might misuse the economic dependency for geopolitical reasons. So to reduce their dependency on China and to de-risk their economies from China, they are trying to build alternate supply chains. And India, Australia, along with Japan, have recently launched the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. Even in the field of higher education, to make it easier for Indian students to access higher education in Australia, just a couple of months back, the Mutual Recognition of Educational Qualifications was signed in March 2023. This mechanism will allow Australian universities to recognize Indian degrees granted by Indian universities. This will facilitate easier mobility for Indian students who are seeking to study in Australian universities. And also under this agreement on education, Australian universities are opening branches in India. Top Australian universities are looking to enter India and set up their branches within India. Both the countries have also signed a partnership agreement for critical minerals investment. Critical and strategic minerals such as lithium and rare earth minerals, which are of strategic value, they are found in quite large quantities in Australia. Australia has very decent reserves of critical and strategic minerals like lithium. This is crucial for the future of the economy to transition into a cleaner economy, because lithium is critical for lithium batteries, right? So India has collaborated with Australia and both the countries are investing in this domain and they have established the Critical Minerals Investment Partnership. They are also part of the International Solar Alliance and they are investing in Pacific Island countries, giving them financial and technical support so that they can invest in solar power. In the small Pacific Island nations like Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, etc., India, Australia together are looking to provide funds and technical support to help them set up solar projects. So these are the wide variety of initiatives that exist between India and Australia. We also have a common concern regarding some recent and disturbing developments that have come up in Australia. As we are witnessing a possible revival of the Khalistan movement in India and around the world, there have been very disturbing developments in Australia where pro-Khalistan groups have raised their ugly head again. It's like a reminder of the 1980s, where few sections of the Sikh diaspora had been radicalized by pro-Khalistan outfits and they were managing to get global support in Europe, in Canada and in the US. And now, as we see the possible attempt to revive the Khalistan movement, we are seeing similar tendencies in Australia as well within the diaspora community. Few sections of the Sikh diaspora in Australia have been radicalized, and recently when the crisis escalated in Punjab following the controversy which included Waris Punjab and Amritpal Singh, we witnessed protests in Australia, clashes as well between pro-Khalistan elements and pro-India groups, and we have also seen incidents where Indian consulates have been attacked in Australia. Several Hindu temples have been defaced by pro-Khalistan elements. The Prime Minister just today, just a few hours back, has made a statement regarding this. Prime Minister Modi has said that India will not tolerate any such activities against Indian interests in a friendly country like Australia. So the rise of pro-Khalistan outfits in Australia is a joint concern. This requires close intelligence cooperation between the two countries to tackle the threat. And this is something which is a key part of the relationship. As part of the close security ties, we have very close intelligence cooperation in the field of counter-terrorism, and we also collaborate in the field of cyber security, as Australia is a leader in cyber security and cyber warfare. Is that clear? So, if this explained the close cultural, political and strategic relationship, now let me take you through the close economic ties as well that has been set up between the two countries. Last year, as I told you, the ECTA was signed, the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which provides for a free trade arrangement between the two countries. This agreement, it hopes to almost double the bilateral trade volume from the current $27 billion to around $50 billion in the next 5 years. Through this, India and Australia are planning to create 1 million jobs in their respective economies. Especially on the Indian side, the goods which have been chosen for duty-free access under the agreement, they are mainly in the labor-intensive sector. So when labor-intensive sectors benefit from the free trade agreement, it will automatically increase exports, thus driving domestic production, and it will push India's industries, manufacturing units and MSME factories to recruit more people, more labor, manual labor, thus creating thousands and thousands of jobs in the country. Under this free trade agreement, almost 85% of Australia's exports will be given duty-free access to the Indian market. And Indian exports will almost get duty-free access across 90% of the commodities that we export to the country, thus providing for a free movement of identified goods that will boost the trade volume and create jobs on both the sides. From India especially, several labor-intensive sectors will benefit, such as gems and jewelry, leather, furniture, machinery. These are some key exports of India to Australia. All these critical sectors will benefit, thus creating almost 1 million jobs in India. You will also get to access Australian products which have high demand in India, right? If duty-free access is given, prized Australian products, be it food commodities, meat and dairy products, beverages including beer and wine, all of them will become cheaper in India, thus giving better market access for Australia as well in India. Australia also exports many other technology-based goods, engineering commodities and even services to India. India also exports IT services and financial and educational services to Australia. So all these aspects of trade will benefit, and the best part about the FTA is that it also includes the required safeguard mechanisms. Because see, India has often had a bad experience with FTAs, especially with regard to India-ASEAN FTA. We had a bitter experience where the trade agreement was largely benefiting ASEAN countries more than India. India's domestic industry was taking a hit because of the ASEAN FTA. So some of the shortcomings in the India-ASEAN FTA have been addressed, and India-Australia FTA is a much better and a refined version of this free trade agreement. There are required checks and balances. For example, there is a rules of origin clause to prevent the dumping of goods from Australia to India. It also helps in preventing a third party from misusing the FTA route. A third party exporter from another country, if they are misusing Australia's route and the FTA to dump their goods in India, the rules of origin requirement will help in identifying such goods, and thus we can levy anti-dumping duties on them. This prevents the flood of cheap imports into India, which could hurt our domestic market. This ECTA also has a mandatory review mechanism after 15 years of operation. This will help address any shortcomings and discrepancies in the trade agreement. And it also has a dispute settlement platform. If disputes were to come up, trade disputes, there is a dispute resolution mechanism created where India and Australia can mutually resolve these disputes. So this is the best part about the ECTA that India-Australia have signed last year. So this comprehensively explains the special relations we have with this country, and it is a big topic, a very important topic. That is why I've tried to cover it in as much detail as possible. I really hope you've understood all the key points. With this, I would like to move on to the next article from page number 10. This column, written by Rajiv Bhatia, a former IFS officer, it deals with an important grouping called the BRICS. The writer is talking about the relevance of BRICS in today's era, because the BRICS grouping has been facing some challenges and issues, but at the same time it has tremendous opportunities and potential as well. So in this context, let's talk about the BRICS grouping first. Let's understand the background to it. Let's understand what the group is all about, and then we'll discuss the viewpoint of the writer. See, the BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's an acronym representing the 5 member countries, which are 5 major emerging economies of the world. It's essentially a grouping that brings together 5 emerging economies of the world. This group traces its origin to the early 2000s, and the idea of such a grouping was first proposed by a very popular economist and an investment banker known as Jim O'Neill. Jim O'Neill was a top economist at Goldman Sachs, the investment banking firm, and in 2000 he brought out a research paper in which he suggested that the BRIC countries are going to be the top emerging economies for the coming decades. He was referring to Brazil, Russia, India, China as the future economic powerhouses of the world. This concept led to the four countries considering this idea seriously, where they could maybe set up a close diplomatic relationship between themselves, as these countries had certain common economic and global objectives. So from 2006-2007, the BRIC ministers, foreign ministers, they started meeting regularly at the United Nations. And finally, in the year 2009, the BRICS, or the earlier version of it, the BRIC summit was carried out at Yekaterinburg in Russia, thus establishing the BRIC as a formidable organization. So initially, South Africa was not a part of it. That's why I'm carefully using the word BRIC, right? It was only in 2010 that South Africa was also added to the group, and thus the BRIC became the BRICS. So today, this organization represents a significant part of the global population. These countries, these 5 countries, account for nearly 42% of the global population, and more importantly, they account for 23% of the global GDP. If you take the trade volume between them, it stands at around 17% of the global trade volume, and clearly these are major economic powers and as well as major military powers as well. Is that clear? But the only thing is, ideologically and politically, these countries are different. If India, Brazil and South Africa are democracies, Russia and China happen to be authoritarian communist states. So this has always been a point of concern. How can such a group with different ideologies survive together? This has always been a criticism as well that has been raised by experts and by the Western countries, which often look at BRICS with suspicion, especially US and few European countries. They don't appreciate the BRICS grouping as it's bringing few open democracies, liberal democracies with authoritarian countries like Russia and China, with whom they have a intense geopolitical rivalry. So this is indeed a valid concern. How can a democratic country like India or Brazil, right, how can they work with authoritarian and dictatorial countries like China or Russia? So that is a concern and question which has always come up. But despite all these internal differences and challenges, the BRICS grouping has actually achieved quite a lot in the last few years. Now let me take you through some major initiatives of BRICS. In 2014, during the Fortaleza summit, which was hosted by Brazil, the BRICS countries announced 2 major initiatives. They established the New Development Bank, or the NDB, and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. These financial institutions that they have created, they act as a rival to the Bretton Woods institutions, which they have always opposed, that is the World Bank and the IMF. See, one of the primary reasons which brought these countries together in 2009 was the 2008 financial crisis, which was triggered by the economic mismanagement of Western countries and Western-dominated institutions. The 2008 financial crisis was a result of critical problems and scandals that were plaguing the American banking system. Is that clear? Along with that, the global institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF, they failed to carry out the right intervention at the right time to prevent the crisis from occurring. These global institutions, financial institutions such as World Bank and IMF, they have always been dominated by the Western countries. World Bank is largely dominated by the US, whereas IMF is dominated by the European Union. And these Western countries have largely controlled global economic and financial policies and institutions through their control over World Bank and IMF. But in the recent past, even though emerging economies like India have contributed to World Bank and IMF, their voting share has not been increased. The same concern is shared by the other countries as well, by the other countries of BRICS. Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, they all have the same complaint that World Bank and IMF are biased towards the Western countries, Western countries which dominate these institutions, they haven't allowed reforms of these institutions, and they have cornered most of the voting rights to themselves, thus giving themselves more decision-making powers, while limiting the voting share of emerging economies like the BRICS countries. So it was this opposition towards the Western countries, their control over the global financial system, which initially led to the formation of the BRICS grouping. So BRICS has always tried to create parallel and alternate global financial institutions to challenge the Western dominated institutions. So to counter the World Bank and the IMF, they established the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. The NDB today has become a very successful institution after being established in 2015 by the BRICS countries with equal vote share. All of them have an equal contribution and an equal vote share. Since then, the NDB has started providing development loans to all the member countries, and it has also brought in new members as well. Many other developing and other smaller countries are also showing a lot of interest in the NDB and the BRICS grouping. Over the years, Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Uruguay, all these countries have been added as members to the New Development Bank. They're also very eager to join the BRICS grouping as well, to become full-time members of BRICS itself. Contingent Reserve Arrangement, on the other hand, provides for emergency liquidity, short-term liquidity, to help the countries overcome any financial crisis. Because otherwise, if they face a liquidity crisis, they often have to seek help from IMF, which is conditional. Taking support from IMF could compromise your economic sovereignty. India itself has a bad experience with IMF back in '92 when we faced a serious economic crisis. So BRICS countries have set up a counter to the IMF called the CRA, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, and a counter to the World Bank called NDB, or the New Development Bank. Now, I would like to give you a small exercise here, a very factual exercise. Please find out the headquarters of BRICS and NDB. Figure out in which city do you find the headquarters of New Development Bank and BRICS organization, and post that in the comment section below. Post the answer in the comments. Other than these successful initiatives, BRICS countries are also working on few important proposals. They are planning to challenge the dominance of the US dollar as a global reserve currency, and they're planning to come out with their own reserve currency. They're also planning to move away from the SWIFT payment gateway for foreign transactions, which is dominated by Western banks and Western institutions, by setting up alternate payment system within the BRICS grouping. They're also planning to have their own credit rating agencies compared to the big three credit rating agencies of the Western countries. You guys might have heard about the top big three credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor or S&P, Fitch, Moody's, right? These are American credit rating agencies which have often been involved in scandals and controversies and in manipulating the market. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, was largely perpetuated by American credit rating agencies, which weren't being transparent in their functioning, right? So the BRICS countries, which were badly hit by the global recession in 2008-2009, they have plans to set up their own credit rating agency to create a parallel institution. They even have plans of a submarine cable to secure their internet from possible Western surveillance. As Western countries largely have the ability to eavesdrop on the internet cables that pass under the sea, BRICS countries have even proposed the idea of an exclusive submarine cable linking the BRICS countries to protect their cybersecurity, to prevent Western countries and their intelligence agencies from snooping on them. So these are some important proposed initiatives, but these proposed initiatives have not really progressed over the years. We haven't seen much of progress in these initiatives. Now, this is where the writer brings up the dilemma and the dichotomy of BRICS. The writer says that we have seen many multilateral groupings in the past which have been very popular and dominant and influential, but very quickly they have withered away. He cites the example of non-aligned movement, the G77 group and the SAARC organization. When India championed non-aligned movement in 1950s with other like-minded countries such as Egypt, then Indonesia, Ghana and Yugoslavia, we founded a third ideology for the world during the Cold War period. During the Cold War, when the world was divided between the American power bloc, representing democracy and capitalism, and the Soviet Eastern Bloc, representing communism and socialism, India championed a new ideology through non-alignment, which was the third neutral path, thus preventing further arms race and geopolitical rivalries. But very quickly, the non-aligned movement died out as the principle itself became irrelevant after a certain point of time. Same with G77, which is a grouping of all developing, underdeveloped countries. G77 symbolizes South-South cooperation between the South countries. India has often been a leader of the G77. But of late, G77 has been losing its relevance at the United Nations. Even the SAARC regional organization representing South Asia, even though it was set up with a lot of ambition in 1985 to integrate and bring the South Asia region together and promote economic integration, SAARC has failed to achieve any major objective as there are constant tensions between the major members of SAARC, such as India and Pakistan. Pakistan especially has derailed all the Indian initiatives, and also the problems across South Asian countries, the political and economic problems, has prevented SAARC from becoming a success. So that is why the writer says we have seen many multilateral organizations come up and rise to influence. They prosper as well initially, but very quickly they wither away. So there have been questions raised, similar questions regarding BRICS as well. BRICS had a lot of promise and potential, but the question is, can it sustain? Of late, new challenges have come up for BRICS, so that is why the question has come up. But the writer argues that BRICS truly has remarkable potential for the future. Despite the problems and challenges, it does has remarkable potential according to the writer. The writer points out the huge achievements of BRICS despite all the recent problems and differences. See, the pandemic itself affected the global economy and the functioning of BRICS as well, as China was largely blamed for the origin of the pandemic. Later, China displayed unnecessary aggression against India by breaching India's sovereignty in the Ladakh sector, which eventually led to the Ladakh clashes at the Galwan River Valley. Since last 3 years, India-China relations have broken down and there are very serious tensions between the two countries. The border standoff still continues, the negotiations are still going on to carry out a disengagement. So when India-China have such tensions, how can the BRICS group function and work successfully? Later, we had Russia invade Ukraine, which has been criticized around the world, and Russia has been even placed under crippling Western sanctions. So this Russian act of aggression against Ukraine and its targeting of the Western countries has raised problems for the BRICS. As democratic countries, India, Brazil, South Africa find it difficult to engage with Russia or even with China. These are the major internal problems and the ideological differences within BRICS. But despite that, the writer says BRICS is not irrelevant. It hasn't lost its influence. The writer says it still has great potential because it is shown by the fact that many countries around the world are seeking membership to the BRICS. Many small countries are eagerly awaiting membership to the BRICS organization. So here the writer compares the BRICS with another grouping called IPSA. IPSA was a grouping formed in 2003 between India, Brazil and South Africa. These like-minded democracies had formed IPSA grouping. It functioned quite well until 2011. But later, under the leadership of China, Russia, the IPSA countries embraced the BRICS grouping instead. And BRICS has become more relevant for them, and in fact, IPSA has even been sidelined over the last 10 years. That shows the fact that even democratic countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, they are quite comfortable in working with Russia and China, despite all the internal differences. See, one of the key issues is that India, Brazil, even South Africa, these three democracies, they are actively pushing for reforms of the UN. But Russia and China, as P5 countries, as members of the Permanent Council of the UN Security Council, they have been opposing UN reforms. They have been not allowing UN reforms to happen or UN reforms to progress. So this is a major internal difference. Russia, China are more obsessed in countering the Western countries, especially the US, because of their geopolitical rivalry. But India, Brazil, South Africa have very good relations with the US. In fact, we are strategic partners of the US. We are trying to balance our ties between the Western countries and Russia and China. That's another major internal difference. So the question here is, how does this fit into the potential for BRICS? How does this fit into the equation for the democratic countries which are members of the BRICS? So these are some criticisms and questions that come up, but the writer says BRICS has remained relevant. It has actually been successful. It has great potential because of one reason. It has given attention to both geopolitical issues and economic issues as well. This approach of BRICS is what sets it apart. It has not just remained an economic grouping, focusing only on economic financial issues. It has paid equal attention to geopolitical issues as well, including counter-terrorism, disaster management. It has even paid attention to some of the wars and conflicts going on in the world, like the civil war in Syria, in Yemen, crisis in Afghanistan. All these key global geopolitical issues have also been the focus of BRICS. So thus BRICS is quickly emerging as a major geopolitical and economic organization, and 19 countries are standing in the line awaiting BRICS membership. This, according to the writer, signifies the importance of the organization and its relevance. Countries from across continents, from South America, Africa, Asia, in total, these 19 countries that I've listed here, they're all seeking membership to the organization, and very soon some of these countries might be added to the BRICS. So from a grouping of just 5 countries, we might witness an expansion of BRICS, which might even make it bigger and more important and relevant than the G20. It might have 20 plus countries very soon, and this is already being seen in the New Development Bank. At the NDB, some of these countries have already been given membership, like Bangladesh, Uruguay, and the others. So going forward, they might be admitted as BRICS members as well, thereby making it one of the most prominent economic and geopolitical groupings of the world. So that is why the writer is arguing that BRICS is not lost. It's not a lost cause. Yes, there are problems, challenges, and internal differences, but still it has tremendous potential, and that is why the writer says BRICS is going to thrive as an organization in the coming years. All right. Now coming to the last column from page number 12, it refers to the ongoing water sharing dispute between the states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. The column here has been brought out in the context of this water sharing dispute, which has emerged as a major problem between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. It's been almost 9 years since Andhra Pradesh was reorganized. Right? It was in 2014 that the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act was enacted by the parliament that bifurcated Andhra Pradesh into Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. This bifurcation meant they had to share their resources as well, divide the resources as well, especially water resources. But even after 9 years, the issue remains pending, particularly the sharing of the Krishna waters remains pending, and thus it has become a major point of controversy and conflict between the two states. Now, if you look at the two maps that I've shared here, you can observe the Krishna River Basin, which covers Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh. These 4 states are part of the riparian region, right? You can also see the major tributaries highlighted over here. For example, Bhima and Koyna, major tributaries of the Krishna in Maharashtra. Then you have Ghataprabha, Malaprabha, the Tungabhadra in Karnataka, right? And you have major projects, irrigation and water management projects on the Krishna Basin, which includes the Nagarjuna Sagar project, the Sri Sailam project that you see over here in the map, along with the Jurala Dam, Pulichintala project, and the upcoming Potti Reddy Padu Head Regulator project. All these are major water management projects in the Krishna drainage basin. But the management of these projects, the execution of the upcoming projects, and the sharing of the waters of the Krishna has become a source of conflict and dispute between Andhra and Telangana. To understand the nature of this dispute, we have to go back in history, look at the origin of this dispute. In fact, the dispute traces its origin to the very formation of Andhra Pradesh as the first linguistic state of India. I'm sure some of you would know that even before the States Reorganization Commission recommended language as a basis for reorganizing the Indian states, much before that, Andhra Pradesh had been recognized as the first linguistic state of India, a separate state for the Telugu-speaking people. Right? This was followed by, this was based on the hunger protest that Potti Sriramulu, the legendary leader from Andhra Pradesh, carried out, demanding the breakaway of Andhra from the Madras province. So with this demand was fulfilled, and eventually when Andhra Pradesh was formally established in 1956, a key agreement was signed between the different regions of Andhra, between the different Telugu-speaking regions of then Andhra Pradesh. A gentleman's agreement was signed between the top leaders of the coastal Andhra region, the dry and arid and the interior parts of the region, that is the Rayalaseema region, and the Telangana region, the region around Hyderabad, bordering Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh and Odisha. These are the three main Telugu-speaking regions that were part of the erstwhile state of Andhra Pradesh. Now, of course, it has been bifurcated into two separate states. So leaders from the three regions, that is Andhra, the coastal belt, the interior, Rayalaseema and the Telangana, these three regions, they got into this agreement, the gentleman's agreement, where they agreed to protect each other's interests, utilize all resources equitably. This also meant that the arid and drought-hit region of Telangana would get an equitable share of water resources from the other two regions. Compared to Andhra and Rayalaseema, Telangana is very drought-prone. Even Rayalaseema to an extent is semi-arid and it's highly drought-prone. But considering the demand for water and agricultural demand, these regions had agreed to ensure that the interests of all the three regions will be satisfied through equitable distribution of water resources. But the problem was, since the British era, since the colonial times, the Andhra region, mainly towards the coastal belt, towards the KG basin, towards the Krishna Godavari delta, this part of Andhra always had better water infrastructure and better irrigation facilities. Because the region was prime for cultivation, the British had mainly focused on this belt and that facilitated many projects that helped the Andhra region, whereas the drought-prone Telangana region had been neglected during the colonial period. Post-independence, when the question of sharing the water resources between different regions came up, in 1969, the Bachawat Tribunal that dealt with sharing of the Krishna waters, it had allocated a fair share for all the riparians, for Maharashtra, Karnataka and then Andhra Pradesh. And internally, within the state of Andhra Pradesh, a decent allocation had been made to all the different regions. The then Andhra Pradesh government, based on this allocation by the Bachawat Tribunal, had allocated waters in the ratio of 512 to 299 TMC feet, where Andhra would get a higher share compared to a smaller share given to the Telangana region. As you can see here, the share given to Andhra region that covered Rayalaseema as well is more than double or almost double the share allocated to Telangana region. Now this became a source of conflict and dispute. As the drought-hit Telangana region got a much lower share than the rain-fed region of Andhra and even Rayalaseema, they got almost a double share. It has always been a source of dispute. The Bachawat Tribunal had also recommended that from the Tungabhadra Dam in Karnataka, drought-prone areas in Telangana should be supplied water through a special arrangement. Especially the Mahbub Nagar region, which is drought-prone and arid. This region was supposed to be fed with enough water through the Tungabhadra Dam in Karnataka. But these recommendations were never followed through and never implemented. So this has always given rise to resentment and discontent amongst the people of Telangana, and they feel a sense of injustice. They feel that wrong has been done to them by the Andhra region, by leaders from Andhra and the then Andhra government and the political parties aligned with Andhra Pradesh. So this sense of discontentment, resentment has always persisted since many, many decades, and now it has burst out into the open after the state was reorganized. In fact, when the demand came up to bifurcate and split the state, one of the main points of argument by Telangana leaders, like KCR for example, one of the main arguments they were making was that Telangana has got the rough end of the deal, that Telangana has not been given equitable share of water resources from the Krishna River. It was one of the key points on which the demand for bifurcation was raised, which was fulfilled through the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act of 2014 that was enacted by the Indian Parliament as per the provisions of Article 3 of the Constitution. But the problem was the Reorganization Act made no mention of water sharing. It hasn't provided any specific provision regarding water sharing. It has left the matter to be resolved between the states, and according to a temporary arrangement that was made in 2015, water sharing has been divided in the ratio of 34:66, where Telangana gets a lower share and Andhra Pradesh gets almost a double share. This was a temporary ad hoc arrangement for the time being, which was worked out in 2015 following the reorganization of the state. So since then, Telangana has been pushing Andhra Pradesh, also putting pressure on the central government as well to ensure that there is a fair division of the waters. The question today is not just about sharing of the Krishna waters, but also about the Godavari River. The respective water management boards, the Krishna and the Godavari River Management Boards, they have not been able to work out a suitable arrangement, and that is the reason why today Telangana is pushing for a greater allocation. It has raised its voice, it had even approached the Supreme Court, and now it has approached the central government demanding an equitable share. Is that clear? It's on this ground that Telangana is demanding equal share, as Andhra Pradesh has always enjoyed a higher share despite being water sufficient, whereas Telangana, despite being water deficient and drought hit, has always been given a lower share and lower allocation. Since the Reorganization Act does not address this and the temporary arrangement is not suitable, Telangana has raised its voice, brought the issue at the Supreme Court as well, and the case was dropped later. But now it has approached the Jal Shakti Ministry at the center to push for a resolution as per the terms of the Constitution. Because in the Indian Constitution, in the Constitution of India, we have Article 262 that provides for settlement of interstate river disputes. Here the Parliament has been empowered to bring out a law to settle such interstate river valley disputes, and even the Supreme Court should not be exercising jurisdiction regarding this process. So accordingly, the Parliament has enacted the Interstate Water Disputes Act through the provisions of Article 262 that provides for establishment of dispute resolution tribunals, water dispute tribunals, so that these interstate water disputes can be resolved according to the provisions of the Act and the provisions of the Constitution. See, please understand, water is a state subject. As per Schedule 7 of the Indian Constitution, water is on the state list. But with regard to interstate disputes, the center also gets to play a role, right? It falls under the concurrent domain, where center has to intervene and accordingly set up a water dispute tribunal under the Interstate Water Disputes Act, which the Parliament has enacted to fulfill the mandate of Article 262. Just like the Kaveri dispute has been resolved between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu through the dispute tribunal, on similar lines, a dispute tribunal would be necessary here, and the center would be considering its options going forward. So this could become a highly contentious issue as well going forward, because water is a very sensitive subject, a very emotional subject for people, because our livelihood, your survival is dependent on it. Also, political parties tend to politicize water as a issue. So if the issue is not managed well by the state governments and the center, the issue could easily escalate into a bigger crisis. But let's hope we don't reach that situation. Let's hope the central government will fairly intervene and a tribunal would be able to resolve the water sharing dispute in a fair manner to both the regions. So this brings my discussion on the big articles to an end. We come to the last part of the discussion today. We'll look at the prelims section. We'll go through some small articles. It'll take just a few minutes. Let's go through these topics quickly one by one. On page number 12, we have an article related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which has been making a lot of news in the last few weeks. The carbon border adjustment mechanism, also referred to as the carbon border tax. This is a mechanism proposed by the European Union, and it is being brought forward for implementation. Recently, the European Commission has notified the implementation of this carbon border tax or carbon border adjustment mechanism with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. See, the EU is quite responsible when it comes to climate change and global warming. It has set an ambitious target to reduce emissions by 65% by the end of the decade, and it wants to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. That's a very ambitious target the EU has set for itself. So EU has placed a number of regulations on its own domestic manufacturers. All domestic manufacturers in the European region, they have to abide by the emission regulations that have been put in place. And those who violate the emission caps, they have to purchase carbon credits from the carbon market. This essentially acts as a tax, as a disincentive for European companies, European manufacturers from breaching the emission cap. This will force them, in fact, it will incentivize them to invest in clean and renewable energy and to move away from such practices where fossil fuel is used. All right, this is an internal regulation of the European Union. But now what has happened is that several European manufacturers and companies, they are shifting production to other countries like, let's say, India, where the environment regulations are a little relaxed. Relaxed emission norms can be seen in certain developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So to such jurisdictions, European companies are shifting base, or they are outsourcing a part of their manufacturing. So what they are doing is they are trying to benefit from the relaxed emission controls of other countries like India or Brazil or Egypt, etc. And from here they get the commodities and goods produced, which they import back into Europe. In an indirect way, they are importing emissions as well. And that is what the European Union is arguing. The EU is saying that you cannot have European companies and manufacturers outsourcing part of their production to other countries where the emission norms are relaxed. So there they are producing goods with more emissions, contributing to climate change. And those goods and commodities are being imported back into Europe. So to prevent this practice and disincentivize this practice, the EU has proposed the carbon border adjustment mechanism, or also called the carbon border tax. Essentially, a higher tax will be levied on these imported goods if they are produced in another country where environmental norms are relaxed, and if emissions have breached the cap, right? These importers will be punished because they will have to pay higher taxes. This will disincentivize European companies from depending on other countries and polluting in other countries, which is eventually contributing to climate change. Is that clear? So this carbon tax will be levied on these imports coming into Europe if the goods have breached the emission caps according to European Union when they are produced in other countries where the emission norms are more relaxed. That is the whole purpose of this carbon border tax. All right. Now this proposed tax by the European Union, which is coming into implementation right now, has raised concerns for India and many other countries. Because we have a lot of exports going to Europe. Europe is a huge export market and one of India's top trading partners. Several Indian manufacturers, especially the MSME sector, they benefit from our market access into the European market. Now the concern here is, if these taxes come up, this could restrict trade. It could limit market access to Indian companies to work with European companies. This could directly affect our economy and affect jobs in India. That is why all the countries opposed this idea during last year's climate change convention, when EU proposed this idea at COP27 that was held in Egypt. India and others had opposed this idea. Even now India has some concerns. So that is why the topic is important. You should know what is this carbon border adjustment mechanism, or what is the carbon border tax. You can expect a basic prelims question from here. Next, question number 5 related to internal security. India's Home Minister Amit Shah has inaugurated a workshop related to the Vibrant Villages program. The Vibrant Villages program is a very important initiative that has been taken up by the Ministry of Home Affairs. It has been announced in the Union budget, and a dedicated fund of more than 4,000 crore rupees has been set aside for this critical project, through which essential border infrastructure and development will be provided to border villages, to more than 2,900 border villages spread across 19 districts in the states and union territories that border China. Is that clear? It's a dedicated development program which aims to create border infrastructure and provide socio-economic development in the border villages that share borders with China. It specifically applies for the Union Territory of Ladakh and the states of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. These are the states and union territories that border China. So here, to ensure that the border villages are developed and the border population is always in favor of India, it's important to provide development to these people. It's important to ensure that people in the border villages, they don't feel neglected by the government, right? So to reinstill that sense of patriotism, to make them the eyes and ears of the security forces and ensure that the border population is always in India's favor, right? It's necessary to provide better development through better connectivity, by building roads, by providing electricity, providing internet, creating jobs and livelihood, providing better education, water supply, better healthcare facilities, right? These are very essential aspects of border area development. So a dedicated program has been launched for this purpose called the Vibrant Villages program, under which more than 2,900 villages across 19 districts in these states and UTs will be developed by the Home Ministry as a security measure in the border areas against China. All right, so that is what you should understand from this topic. Next, topic number 6, page number 16. The Smart Cities Mission is in news. The Union Minister for Urban Affairs, Hardeep Singh Puri, has informed that almost 90% of the funds that were allocated under Smart Cities Mission has been utilized, that too effectively utilized, and 73% of the projects have been completed. So this brings attention to the Smart Cities Mission, which is a flagship scheme that was launched by the Modi government in the year 2015. The primary objective of Smart Cities Mission is to develop 100 cities in the country by leveraging smart technology, especially ICT technology, information communication technology. The whole objective was to provide for better urban governance, to manage the rapidly urbanizing areas of India, to use information technology, communication technology, and emerging technologies to make the cities smarter. For example, providing CCTV cameras backed with facial recognition technology for better policing, for better security, using automated signals, using satellite imagery for planning, right? So using technology and making the cities smart, making the urban administration smarter, is the primary goal of Smart Cities Mission, which has been implemented in 100 select cities since 2015. This year marks the end of the mission. 2023 is supposed to be the end of the mission, but now the government is considering an extension, and the government has submitted a report showing that the mission is a very big success. The government has claimed that 90% of the allocated funds have been effectively used. 73% of the projects have already been completed. So if it is extended further, the government will further ensure the success of the mission. All right, so that is the Smart Cities Mission. Now coming to the last article from page 16, India has provided rail infrastructure and rail related equipment to Bangladesh. As part of the friendly relations we have, that too in the field of connectivity and helping each other in infrastructure, the Indian Railways has supplied broad gauge locomotives broad gauge locomotives have been gifted by Indian Railways to Bangladesh. Is that clear? This is part of the connectivity initiative that India and Bangladesh have established. We have interconnected our road and railway lines. We are also connecting our inland navigation routes through our national waterways. The whole idea is to connect India with Bangladesh and provide better access to Northeast India, to create an alternate route from Northeast India to mainland India by bypassing the Siliguri corridor, which is a strategic weakness and choke point for India. So Bangladesh gives us that alternate access via its road rail network and inland navigation network. We have many joint rail networks running between the two countries. You have a direct train from Kolkata to Dhaka and many other trains, even the train line from Agartala to Akura, from Tripura to Bangladesh basically, right? So there are many such railway lines running between the two countries. It promotes the movement of people, builds cultural and economic ties, and more importantly, enables cargo movement that boosts the trade volume between the two sides. So to further strengthen the railways of Bangladesh, Indian Railways has gifted around 20 broad gauge locomotives to Bangladesh Railway, and we are also sharing the ICT infrastructure based on satellite imagery, which is used by Indian Railways for planning the route alignment. Indian Railways makes use of smart technology while planning route alignment. It uses a ICT platform and it has been embedded with satellite imagery. It provides all specific details about each and every location when railway lines are being planned, right? And this was developed by Indian Railways under the PM Gati Shakti scheme. So this infrastructure, this IT tool based on satellite imagery has also been gifted to Bangladesh along with the locomotives. The whole idea is to strengthen the railways of Bangladesh and interconnect the networks to promote the movement of people and especially the movement of cargo between the two countries. All right. So this completes my discussion of the Hindu newspaper in complete detail. Please take up the mains practice questions. Both the questions are related to the topics we have already covered. So I really hope you guys take the questions seriously, write an answer to it and post them in the answer writing portal which has been given below. So with this, I would like to wrap up my discussion. I really hope it was a good, fruitful session. So do let me know how it went in the comments below. If you like the videos, support us by sharing it with other aspirants. Press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.